Okay, we're going to get started. Um, Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual tasting, Burgundy Grapes in New York, hosted by sommelier Yannick Benjamin. My name is Sam Filler. I'm the executive director of the New York Wine and Grape Foundation, and we are the trade association that represents the talented and hardworking winemakers from across New York. And we have the privilege of bringing you today's event. Some of you may have expected to participate in this seminar 6 months ago when we were going to do it at the Rainbow Room for the New York Drinks New York Grand Tasting. And as we know, unfortunately, COVID put a lot of plans on upside down in March, and we unfortunately had to postpone until now. And so for those of you that joined us in the morning, welcome back. And those who are just joining us this afternoon, you're part of our inaugural day of virtual tastings of New York wines. And so I welcome you. And while this format's a little bit different than sitting in a seminar room at the Rainbow Room, I think we've all gotten very comfortable with participating in Zoom and doing virtual tastings like these. So we're excited to have our original host, Yannick Benjamin, join us today to tell the story of Burgundy grapes and their place with New York wines. I think often when we think about New York wines, the two varietals that come to mind are Riesling and then Cabernet Franc as our leading red wine grape. And they have received a lot of attention and praise from the trade and consumers. But often if you ask a New York winemaker to show you their Chardonnay or Pinot Noir, you'll probably be greeted with a grin from ear to ear. So in this seminar, Yannick and our distinguished winemakers and winery owner panelists are going to take us on a journey through New York's cool climate expressions of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, the grapes that we know have made Burgundy so famous. And thankfully, the journey doesn't stop here. We're going to be hosting many more virtual tastings over the next couple of months. And so we hope this is a good introduction to those who are not familiar with New York wines to the very creative, diverse, and ever-evolving wine world of wine that we have here in New York State. And we invite you to participate in our future tastings. And I know you're excited to hear from Yannick and all about the wines. But first, we do want to thank our partners who are supporting these seminars. They wouldn't be possible without our sponsors, American National Insurance, Caddo Cooperage. These are companies that are dedicated to providing quality services to grape growers and winemakers across New York State, and we're proud to call them our colleagues and friends. Just a little housekeeping, just, if you're not familiar with virtual tastings or how we're going to be running it, for those of you who are with us live today of New York Wine Trade and Media, we're going to keep you on mute for the beginning of the discussion. There will be time for discussions, for questions at the end. And, while the presentation is going on, we invite you to submit questions via the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. And as it's appropriate during the discussion, we'll open it up to an interactive chat with the panelists, and either Yannick or staff will read your question and then ask you to unmute yourself to follow up. Also, to familiarize yourself with the wines being tasted today, we've prepared a tasting mat, text sheets, and a map of our regions. So if you haven't had a chance to review those yet, we're going to put a link in the chat feature so you can download those onto your computer. So we're excited to get started, and we're pleased to welcome our host, Yannick Benjamin, who is the head sommelier at the University Club, and he's the proprietor of Contento Restaurant located in New York City. He's also a proud New Yorker, born into a family of French restaurateurs who knew that he knew that hospitality was his calling from a young age. Yannick started his career at La Cirque, Oceana, Jean-Georges, and Atlas before he became sommelier at Felidia and Atelier at the Ritz-Carlton. In 2003, a car accident left Benjamin paralyzed below the waist. However, he quickly adapted, and he outfitted his wheelchair with a table that allows him to work the floors as sommelier. And he's been recognized by Wine Enthusiast magazine as a top 40 under 40. He was named Person of the Year by New Mobility magazine in 2017. And Yannick also created Wine on Wheels, which is one of New York City's largest and most exciting wine events, which has been expanded to other cities in Chicago, Portland, and Washington, D.C. Wine on Wheels brings together hundreds of esteemed sommeliers volunteering to pour over 250 wines from around the world for charity. Yannick is a para-athlete and competes in marathons to raise money for Wheeling Forward. And now, without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Yannick, who's going to guide us through an exploration of all of New York's Chardonnays, Pinot Noirs that we have to offer. And we're looking forward to you joining us. Thank you.
Hey, Sam, good to see you. I think the last time we saw each other was you drove me down from the Finger Lakes because I think flights had gotten canceled because of bad weather. So I drove back with you. I was very lucky, but it was a great trip. Yeah. And I think that was in the winter of 2019. So time does fly by.
And actually, it was August 2019. It was It was an epic drive. We were packed in my car. Amy Devishine from the Rainbow Room was in there too. We had just done the judging for the New York Wine Classic.
That's right. Yeah. She was in the car too. Yeah, it was pretty cool. I'm really honored and delighted to be part of this awesome seminar. Certainly, this is not about me, but it's about these wonderful people who are doing tremendous work. To those that have made time in their very busy schedules to be part of this, thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who organized this seminar of the New York Wine Growers Foundation. This is really great. I think the silver lining to all of this, I just want to say, I know these are really difficult times with COVID, and they're quite scary, and a lot of us work in hospitality. For myself, one of the silver linings is that it's given me the opportunity to explore what's in my very own backyard. I've tried to make it a point to visit at least every few weeks a couple of wineries. I've done a couple out east. I will be out there again next week. And when I say out east, in Long Island, and then, certainly the Hudson Valley. And I plan on doing some more trips out to the Finger Lakes in October. Obviously, if you live in the city, you need access to a car, but there's always a will. There's always a way if you have the will and the want to check out these properties. I suggest that you all do. These are some of the nicest people. Most of them are family-owned properties, and they're very welcoming. And really, I learn a lot from them because I'm in the world of hospitality, and they teach me a lot about hospitality because they're so kind and generous. So thank you for coming on. And, really, we're going to start it off by just kind of, we'll go one by one with each winemaker. And if anyone wants to chime in the meantime, please do so. And so the first one that I really want to introduce is Whitecliff Vineyard, the North River Blanc de Blanc. And this is with Brad Martz. Brad Martz, I met you for the first time 3 weeks ago at Whitecliff. Yep. And you were disgorging of the wine, and that was pretty fantastic. You were kind enough to let us come into the winery, despite the fact that you were really busy, and allowed us to ask you a million questions. So Brad, welcome, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate Yannick. And yeah, it was great seeing you. Hopefully I didn't get you sprayed too much with the bubbly while we were disgorging, but sometimes it's a good thing. But sorry, go ahead.
Can you tell us a little bit about Whitecliff, your story about how you got into wine, but also this delicious Blanc de Blanc and how it all came about?
Sure, absolutely. No, so Whitecliff, we're at Hudson Valley Vineyard and Winery. So we were started we just had our 20-year anniversary last year, started by Michael and Yancy Migliori on their home property. And I've been with Whitecliff for almost 10 years now. So I started out in about 2010, was the assistant winemaker. And then about 2012 was when I became the winemaker. With my start here was actually with the North River side of things. So we started with the Champagne business. The North River is a sister company to Whitecliff. And it specializes particularly in our sparkling wines. And it's a partnership between Michael, a gentleman by the name of John Huddleston, and myself in producing these wines. Like I said, I've been with Whitecliff for about 10 years. I came from a different background, which seems to be the way most people in Hudson Valley are. Like I came from tech, and then I got affiliated with Michael and Yancy, and really kind of I got everything started here and built my roots from Whitecliff and learning the business and learning winemaking and everything from there. Now from the wine itself, just go into a little bit more detail about the wine, or?
Oh, I'm just curious, specifically, perhaps you can talk a little bit about the Hudson River Valley and the region itself, and what one should expect as far as stylistically when we're talking about Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, but how that plays into the style of the sparkling wine, this method traditional that you've made.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Hudson Valley, like Whitecliff in particular, we are it's a castle soil. So what we're looking at is like gravelly loam soil. So a lot of gravel. We're right up against the Shuangan Bridge. So we tend to get, it's all the glacial outwash. So we're getting that type of soil base here, so it's reasonably well drainage or good drainage for the most part. What we typically will get here is our growing degree days are on par with, actually probably maybe a little bit more than the Finger Lakes, but we're just behind Long Island when it comes to actual growing degree days. So sugar wise, we get we get nice sugars. And then from an acidity standpoint, the acidities stay very strong here. So our wines are typically very crisp, but we can also get the alcohol levels to where they need to be because of the degree days. The only issues we can have here is something that we just had 2 nights ago, which is frost. So we just got a pretty heavy frost 2 nights ago. So we're in the process of basically picking all 20 acres here over the next week, unfortunately. But that's the other great thing about sparkling and our Chardonnay is we're able to pick that a little bit early. So we're able to get that. We were able to get that in. It was all picked 2 weeks ago. We were a little bit earlier this year than normal, but we're able to get the nice sugar levels. We're able to get the great acidity that we were looking for. And it's also, we're able to bring it in before any type of disease can hit, which we tend to get because of course we get all of the hurricanes and things like that you'll get down on Long Island and other coastal areas, and heavy humidities and things on inland locations.
Now, as a reference point, stylistically, for people that are familiar with actual champagne, how does a sparkling wine done in the traditional method different stylistically from a champagne style?
I mean, stylistically, it's hard to say completely because French, they don't like to really tell us how they do things in detail. So we kind of have to do things on our own and figure things out. But through a lot of conversations and with different people, I think we're pretty similar. Like everything we do nowadays, it's all full cluster pressing. We're doing a lot of taking different fractions that we're using for the press, just to kind of create the best cuvee, the best base wine that we can produce. So stylistically, we're similar there. We're also producing from the base, and we're doing cuvées. I mean, this is the Blanc de Blanc, so it's 100% Chardonnay. But one thing, we're doing longer. Typically doing longer tirage. So this particular wine was in tirage for about 4 years. So I think traditionally, a lot of times here you'll see much shorter time frames, but we're typically in like the 3 to 4 year tirage time frame to kind of create some more of the the brioche notes and things that you'll get from a lot of the champagnes. So I think that's pretty close to the same.
And what's the blend here as far as the vintages? I mean, and what went behind that philosophically?
Well, typically with the Blanc de Blanc, it's typically a vintage date. So it's usually a 2000. This one's primarily, I believe, a 2014. So but we've only recently started to do blending with some of the Blanc de Blancs. Our cuvee that we produce is a blend. So I'm typically taking 2 years worth of different cuvee blends and then putting them together to create the best that we can. But this particular wine, the Blanc de Blanc, again, is primarily its vintage. So this would be a 2014 vintage for Chardonnay.
So it's 100% single vintage.
Yeah, exactly.
Aged for about 4 years, correct?
Aged about 4 years. Yeah, aged about 4 years and was bottled. It's been in a bottle probably for about a year. And then the difference on this one in particular is that also the Blanc de Blanc, be considered natural when it comes to dosage. So it's a no sugar dosage. So basically we're not changing it with any type of sugar additions to change the mouthfeel or do anything. You're getting what it was straight when it was disgorged. The only thing that's added to it, there is a dosage, but it's just an SO2, so some metabisulfite just for its preservative standpoint or reasons. And that's only at about 30 ppm, so it's not very much.
So if you were to do this purely based on Pinot Noir, if it was a Blanc de Noir, how much different would it be compared to a pure Chardonnay, in particular since it's grown out in the Hudson Valley?
Well, Pinot, that's a good question. I'm not exactly sure. I made my first Blanc de Noir with Pinot in 2018, so that haven't had enough time to see where it's at. So, I mean, usually with the Pinot, typically with Pinot, the acids most of the time come in a little bit lower, so it's not as crisp, but there's a little more structure to it, a little more body to it. So that's what I see with the cuvee when I'm doing a cuvee blending. Is the Chardonnay brings the kind of brightness, the acidity, and just the kind of crispness, and then the Pinot kind of opens it up a little bit and rounds it out a little bit more structurally.
You know, since we're on the topic of Burgundy grapes, you also make a really fantastic Gamay. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about that before we move on to Lamoreaux.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, the Gamay, make a few different products out of the Gamay. Make a Gamay, the strict Gamay. It's not done Nouveau style. It's done Cru style, Grand Cru style. So typically the Gamay is in oak barrels, usually for about a year, and then we're producing a kind of structurally much more similar to a Grand Cru style. Again, kind of what I was saying. Still a very light, kind of easy drinking type of Gamay. One of those you could throw in a fridge and drink in the summertime like a rosé, or save it for Thanksgiving and eat something nice with it. So that's kind of where we're at. Everything is estate grapes that we're producing as well. We're one of only, I think, 2, or it might be 3 growers now of Gamay in the state. It seems to be changing. It's a pretty hip grape these days, so a lot of people are planting it and putting it out there. And I also make a Gamay Blanc, so a white from Gamay, so a still wine. It's not a sparkler, which I first started making 2 years ago, and that actually turned out pretty well. And then we're making a Gamay Rosé in addition. And we have a vineyard here in Gardner, where if people come up, they can come see us in Gardner. And then we have another separate vineyard up in Hudson, New York, right on the Hudson River, what we call our Olana vineyard. And we have more Gamay planted there. We have about 5 acres planted here in the home vineyard, and another close to 5 acres planted up in Hudson.
Well, Brad, thank you so much for that wonderful background on Whitecliff and North River. I mean, wonderful wines, and I definitely have every intention of going back up there. And it was a pleasure to spend some time with Yancy as well. I see her on the screen, so hello there. And Aaron Royson from Lamoreaux Landing, Blanc de Blanc. He's featuring his 2014 vintage. He is on the east side of Seneca Lake, but he's actually originally from Minnesota, 5th generation farmer. And you were 19 years old when you started planting some hybrid grapes out in Minnesota. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. So we had the idea to diversify our corn and soybeans. So the University of Minnesota had developed these new varieties that were hardy to 40 below temperature. So my father and I decided to put some vines in the ground, and I went off to school down to New Zealand to study grape growing and winemaking. And I finished school, and my old man told me, better go get a job because you don't really know what you're doing. So I landed up in the Finger Lakes, and I've been here since 2002.
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about Lamoreaux and your relationship? Because you worked there and then you left and then you came back, and I believe so, if I got that right. But I'd love to hear more about the history about it. And I know you guys are really big on farming, very detailed with your farming management, environmental management practices. Love to hear all about that if you can.
Yeah. So like I said, I came to Lamoreaux in 2002. It was the first position I took in the Finger Lakes. Lamoreaux has been around since 1990. Their first vintage they released a sparkling. It was actually a Blanc de Noir. Lamoreaux is over 100 acres of estate-grown vinifera, so 100% of what we produce as wine is estate farmed. We're 100% solar powered. We really believe in the commitment to being aware of the region where we are. The place and the ground that we grow the grapes on is incredibly unique to the entire region. So we find that it's incredibly important to uphold that position that we have. It's a pretty remarkable site with the fruit that's grown here and the caliber of wine that's grown.
Absolutely. And just a couple of questions, and I'm just so curious, can you talk a little bit about Seneca Lake? Because that's where you guys sit on. And for those of us, I mean, I've been there, but there are people who have never been up to the Finger Lakes. Can you talk a little bit about the whole, the soil composition, how some people out in the Finger Lakes think they have better exposure because they're on the east side, others think it's better on the west side? Maybe get a little bit more in depth in that, if you can.
Yeah, so our position on Seneca Lake, being on the east side, is we're positioned at one of the deepest parts of the lake. So we have an incredible consistency of temperature in terms of keeping the levels consistent for the growing season and buffering against any climatic events that might happen. A lot of our cultural practices allow us to create incredibly consistent growing patterns in our fruit canopy. So all the vines are trellised to Scott Henry, so it's a split canopy. So every cluster gets sun at one point or the other of the day. We have this remarkable draw and drain, natural drain on the ground here. So we get a lot of unique qualities that aren't necessarily seen to our neighbors, just the way the land rolls.
And can you also, if you don't mind, maybe give us a little insight on what, the beginning of the year looks like till when you finally till you finally harvest the grapes, like, the cycle of being a winemaker and wine grower in the Finger Lakes, particularly in Seneca?
Well, sorry, could you repeat that again?
It's okay. What, starting in January, what's your cycle? What's your schedule look like as far as a winemaker and a farmer out in Seneca Lake look like from January till about the moment you harvest the grapes to when you bottle?
Okay, sorry, my head was in harvest right now. We just brought in a bunch of Pinot Noir this morning, and at any rate, January. So beginning of the year, we're usually looking at starting to tee up our previous vintages wine that we're going to bottle. So our Rosé, our Gruner Veltliner, our Gewürztraminer, Muscat Attenal. So we're just kind of framing up what we want to progress with. So we'll line that up. We'll do our first run of bottling. Then we'll start getting into Riesling blends and Chardonnay blends, and that kind of takes up a good bulk of the year. And by then, we're getting closer to March or April. We're starting to see the vines kind of wake up, and we're getting a little bit of an assessment of what the crop is going to be. We've had any events in the winter that might have been cause for making sure that the crop is adjusted based on buds being laid down from pruning. Then after we bottle up the Rieslings and the Chardonnays, we'll move on to the reds, usually from the previous vintage before. So like in 2020 of this year, around May, June, we were looking at bottling 18s.
Got it.
So, and then before we know it, harvest is coming around, and this year we're not doing sparkling, but the previous year we did. So we were taking samples in beginning of August. Last year we picked them in the middle of September, so it was a little bit later last year. But that's kind of the rundown. Then before we know it, harvest is done, and then we're trying to wrap up everything of all the fermentations.
Aaron, you had mentioned right now, if I understood that correctly, you said this year you have no plans on making sparkling. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And what's the reason for that?
Well, we usually have, because we have complete control over being 100% estate grown, we can sort of gauge the vintage per vintage. And I mean, I'm a believer that every vintage is a great vintage for sparkling in the Finger Lakes. It's just the conditions are here, the soil is here, the limestone profiles that we have. Just everything manifests in this perfect build for sparkling production. But we just felt that this year might be a little too warm for sparkling. And so that was one reason. It's a number of factors, but we really like to focus on the highest level of quality that we can.
So on a year like 2020, how many different wines do you plan on making? I mean, that are obviously not sparkling. How many different cuvées?
We'll do around 25 different wines this year. Variations from single vineyard to estate blends.
Great. Aaron, can you talk to a little bit about the Lamoreaux landing, the 2014, absolutely delicious, the Blanc de Blanc?
Thank you. Yeah. So that wine was picked in beginning of September of 2014, and then it was bottled in 2016 in January after aging 100% in stainless steel that entire time. We just disgorged it for the first time on January 16th of 2019. Wow. So it has a considerable amount of lees aging, and there's our dosage is around 11 grams of residual sugar, but that's based on a pH of 2.9 and a TA of 11.8 grams per liter. So, we're dealing with some pretty nervy acidity and a really sturdy backbone of the pH. So it supports that dosage, really lifts the palate.
So what's the next vintage that's expected to come out after 14?
The next vintage will be the 2019s.
2019.
Yep.
Wonderful.
So that vintage will be a Blanc de Blanc, a Blanc de Noir, a Brut, and a sparkling Riesling, all bottle conditioned.
Very cool. Well,
yeah.
Aaron, thank you so much. And next time I make it up to the Finger Lakes, I'd love to meet you in person and come check out Lamoreaux.
It'd be great.
And again, everyone that's on the panel, if you guys want to chime in, please do so. And for all the attendees, if you have any questions in the meantime, please send them our way. Okay. Thank you. So Gabriella from Macari, how are you?
Hello.
Yes,
how are you? Great to see everybody.
So we have Gabriella Macari from Macari Estate out in Mattituck, which is out in the North Fork of Long Island, just a beautiful little place. She's going to be talking about her 2018 Estate Chardonnay. But perhaps before we go into the wine, I think it's really important that people have an idea on where you're at, the actual North Fork, and a little bit about the winery itself.
Okay, great. Yeah, we're on the North Fork of Long Island in the town of Mattituck. So I always do the sideways peace sign. I see a lot of familiar faces. So a lot of you have been here. Mattituck is stunning. There's a lot of agro-tourism. We're 2 hours away from the city. Our farm specifically, my grandfather purchased in the 60s when no one wanted to be here, right? Like everyone was buying land in the Hamptons and people thought the North Fork was for potato farmers and not a cool place, but he saw the potential in the 60s. He fell in love with the water. So our farm actually borders the Long Island Sound, which is beautiful. And a lot of these wineries out here are blessed with the fact that we have this maritime climate. The water really moderates the temperature, so we don't have frost threats at all. Really, there isn't a winter damage. We have this beautiful breeze that kind of just whisks across the island, the forks, and really dries things out. So for example, it rained like 3 days ago here and the fruit was dry the next morning, which was stunning. And that's really lucky. You really don't want wet fruit right now during harvest. And the other beautiful thing is we have these glacial soils. So we have these like really sandy soils. Again, it rained and there are no puddles on the farm. The water really kind of just like pushes right through. And that's super important with the amount of rain that we do get. It's really important to have the drainage. So we're very lucky, really a beautiful place. That's not to say there aren't issues, you know, still mildew pressure for sure, but we do feel blessed to be here.
I mean, the one thing that I've always found that made Macari so special is that there's always someone there from the family, right? And I went there last year, and it was a Saturday afternoon, and the tasting room was like jam packed. I mean, you've got that pizza truck that's absolutely, the pizzas there are delicious. But your mom was there, Alexandra, and she's there polishing glasses, and she's hustling and you're involved with a lot of the front of the house aspects of it with marketing. Your brother's out in the vineyards, your dad's there working as well. I mean, that makes it quite special, quite unique. And you guys have done such a great job spreading the gospel about quality wines that can come out of Long Island. What makes your Chardonnay so unique and special, and why does it do so well?
Thank you. To your comment about the family, I would say child labor, but sometimes I say that and it's not funny. But it's true. No, we're always here. And that's important. And it's important even now. Like, I mean, we were up here, started at 6 a.m. and we made a major decision this morning based on the Chard that came in, and, you know, little things like that. It's important to have people on board with energy and also making decisions. The Chard, I'll tell you straight up, this was not a good year. It was a really, really rough vintage, this 18. It was rough for the reds, but we managed to get the whites off quickly. And we kind of made the decision collaboratively. We're really not releasing any reds from 18. It just rained and rained and rained and rained. So to us, the whites are super special because they came off the vine before everything happened. I think what's super interesting about this Chardonnay is it doesn't spend time in oak. It doesn't go through malolactic conversion. It's super fresh, really zippy. And this vintage in particular, the 18, I just tasted it against the 17. It doesn't have the generosity of fruit that the 17 had, but I think it's really linear and really exciting to us. So yeah, it's small production. It's smallish, 600 cases, 7 months on lees. And the really special thing about this, and this might just be the vintage because typically our alcohols are in the 12, 5, 13 range. This is 11.5. So it's in your like Hunter Valley, Semillon, like Muscadet range. And I think it's really, you know, it's really refreshing and it's not overly intense. So for me, this wine, it still has complexity. I don't think it's just like something we should forget about either. I think it will age and gain interest, you know, over the years. I just opened an 07 to kind of just see, I wish you guys were with me, but I opened an 07 and a 98, which was really our first vintage of Chard, just to see how these wines age. And they're hanging in there, you know, and I think that's another testament to quality and testament to the work that we're doing in the vineyard too. These wines are not just drink now, enjoy now. I think they're also wines that you can lay down.
Gabriella, I mean, can you talk a little bit about your farming? I mean, I know you guys are very meticulous about that. You were kind enough to drive me around the vineyards like a few years ago. I think that could be something, you know, the audience may want to hear about because that's really key to your success in growing Chardonnay out east.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say, you know, I was thinking a lot about the name of the seminar in Burgundy and thinking about Burgundy in New York. And while you can have inspiration from other regions, right? So I'm kind of taking this on a tangent for a second, but I was in Burgundy, lucky enough to be in Burgundy in November. And I was like, whoa, Rouleau's doing this, and then he does this, and then they do this, and let's do that here, you know, but we're different, right? This is not, you know, we're not Burgundy. Our pH is different. Our TA is different, right? So you can get inspiration from there, but ultimately what's most important is your fruit quality. So we pressed Chard this morning, picked it a little earlier than normal because we really liked the flavor yesterday when we were tasting it in the vineyard. And the fruit's clean. Like there's no botrytis right now. There's no sour. We're really, really excited with the quality of the fruit. And that's where your wine starts. So I think that farming is very important. My father was inspired by Alan York. If anyone knows Alan, he sadly passed away a couple years ago, but he was a biodynamic pioneer. He inspired us to get cows. So we have about 30 cows on the farm. Every single piece of manure is picked up. We make our own compost. He's been inoculating the compost with biodynamic preps and spraying 500 and 501 and 508. We are not certified, we're not Demeter, but we feel like the intention's there, right? Like what we put in, we really feel like we see in the quality of the fruit. And the biggest thing that we do is we do not use herbicide. And that's something that we've been very adamant about for a very long time. So I think, the quality starts 100% in the vineyard, and hopefully you can taste that even in what I would call a really bad vintage,
So is this, just before I move on to Christopher Bates, but, what should one in general expect, as far as the style that comes out of the North Fork when it comes to Chardonnay?
I have to answer this totally honestly. I think, it's
please.
varied. It's varied. I think, from producer to producer, from vintage to vintage, there's a lot of vintage variation, which really actually keeps it exciting. You have to stay on your toes. You have to remember the years. And I see Amy and Len on this call, and they know those vintages, because, they're out here tasting every single time, every single year. But I think, it's varied. I think, so this is an estate ferment, right? We call it our estate bottling, 7 months on lees. It doesn't go through mallow, but then we make a chard that does go through mallow. So we're still 25 years in experimenting, and still really getting inspiration from other producers around the world. Chardonnay can be a technical thing to make, right? So are you gently pressing, or are you pressing whole cluster? Are you bringing the solids into the ferment, or are you leaving most of them out? There's so many things going on. And I think it is a wine that ultimately is quite varied. But the style, which I spoke about earlier, is really that, for me, that crisp, low alcohol, great. There's a lot of malic acid here, really bright acidity.
Well, the first 3 wines, they're all just, 12%. We had Lamoreaux, which was at 10.8, and then you're at 11 point. Is that correct?
It's 11.5, yeah, right? Am I right? I hope I'm right. Yeah, 11.5.
Which is pretty remarkable. And, the North River is at just on, I think, 12.5. It's really, just so balanced. So thank you, Gabriella, for that.
Thank you.
A little tour of the North Fork. We have a very special guest from Element Winery. I've never heard of him. I think his name is Christopher Bates, and he's a winemaker, he's a chef, he's an entrepreneur. He makes beer, he's a farmer, he's a husband. Tell us.
Sir. What's up, buddy?
Good to see you. Listen, tell us a little bit about Element Winery, how it all came about. I know, you're born and raised out in that region, so you're quite familiar with that area. What inspired you to get into the world of winemaking when, you actually started as a chef, and then you got into being a sommelier, and now you're making some fantastic wines. We're going to be featuring the 2014 Pinot Noir, but love to hear a little bit about the story of Element Winery and yourself.
Yeah, sure, of course. So I grew up here. I grew up just outside of the Finger Lakes, but spent plenty of time here as a kid and around Seneca and the lakes. And ultimately, as I kind of grew up getting more and more into hospitality and more into kitchens and working in restaurants, and eventually more and more into wine, I remember sort of having the opportunities to, kind of travel around and taste through the Finger Lakes with my parents when I was a kid, and, get to do the little juice tastings and things like that. Eventually, I started to look old enough and I got to taste other things. And so, got to sort of grow up tasting these wines. And, when I was younger, I was like, oh, this tastes nice. And as I started to learn a little bit more and more about kind of wine in the rest of the world, I started to maybe question a little bit more about why the wines that I was being shown here in the Finger Lakes tasted the way that they did back in the 90s and early 2000s. And And, you know, as I kind of went off to college, got more into wine, learned more about kind of wine around the world, I started to really come back and kind of question why the wines tasted the way that they did. And I was always told the same thing. I was told it's because the climate's too extreme. You know, this is as good as we can do. Like, we should expect to just be, you know, we're excited about making wine that's good for New York or good for the East Coast or whatever those kind of terms were. I was being told that was all we should expect. And so kind of went about my life a little bit and went off and wanted to learn more about winemaking. So I went and did my first harvest in Italy, up in the Valpolicella, and spent a lot of time up in Alto Adige and Trentino during that time. From there, I went up to the Mosel, and I did harvest in the Mosel before returning back to Northern Italy. And kind of every one of those experiences, I thought to myself, shit, it's extreme here. Like, this is a pretty extreme climate, yet they make great wine. They have a great reputation. They don't let that hold them back from sort of the potential of what could be done in those regions. And so when I returned from Europe, I really kind of set my mind about wondering what would happen if maybe we approached winemaking here in the Finger Lakes with a different mentality. And I think there's a lot that kind of goes into that. You know, I see Megan's going to be talking next. And so maybe Megan can talk a little bit also about kind of the old school history here. But like, you know, you got to remember, like, when a lot of things changed here in the Finger Lakes, it was really the late 70s and early 80s that we started to see kind of our boom of small wineries. And back in those days, there was, like, especially in the 90s, there was two voices telling us what wine was supposed to taste like, right? It was Robert Parker and Wine Spectator. And like, great things that they've done, sure, but they have a really particular style of wine that they sort of appreciated and definitely championed during those times. And that is not the style that the Finger Lakes, I think, ultimately is really kind of a natural at making. And so ultimately, you know, as people were kind of getting their start up here, they were just reading about and being told by the voices of experts and also by, you know, our customers, like, hey, your wines aren't that good. They're light in color. They're not, you know, oaky. They're not dark enough. They're not thick enough. They're not high enough in alcohol. And I think ultimately at that time, I just don't think that there was the confidence to really kind of understand that maybe that's just because our wines are a different style. And so ultimately, when I returned back, I really wanted to wonder what would happen if I kind of sort of rethought the way that we tried to make Finger Lakes wines, and sort of like Gabriella was talking about, like, I never want to be in this mindset that we're trying to make wine like Germany or like Burgundy or like the Loire, but we also need to not be trying to make wine like we're in California, which I think was really what was driving a lot of what happened here in the 90s and the early 2000s, was this kind of mindset towards that's what good wine is. And, you know, thankfully now, as we like are in this new age of wine where like the rise of the Instasom and, you know, the Raj Pars and Pascalines telling us that like it's cool for wine not to be 15% alcohol, like all of a sudden now this is exploded with this whole new kind of concept that we can do things here that maybe we never thought were possible because we're always trying to be somebody else.
Well, Christopher, it's funny that you should say that because Len Thompson, he just said that, yes, these are Burgundian varieties in name, but none of these wines so far are trying to be something that they aren't. And I completely agree. And you've emphasized, you know, I've sat down in a couple of seminars that you led, Chris, and you have always said that your wines are distinctively Finger Lakes, right? And maybe can you talk a little bit about it? What makes it distinctively Finger Lakes?
Yeah, cool. So one of the things that I think is really important to understand is the Finger Lakes is different than almost every other place. I mean, every place is different than every other place in the world. We can all say that for sure. But I think one of the things that's really important to recognize is that a lot of times when people talk about the Finger Lakes, sort of locally, domestically, and internationally, they think about the Finger Lakes as this New World wine region. And the reality is that we have so little in common with any other New World wine region that there's almost no comparison to be made there. And I think that that's a really important thing, because if you come into tasting the Finger Lakes and thinking about Malbec and Shiraz and Napa Cab, like, you're gonna be looking for the wrong things, I think, in our wine. That being said, I also think that we're really distinctive in sort of in the old world sense as well, which I think maybe our climate is more inclined towards making kind of old world styled wines more so than new world styled wines in a lot of ways. We also have a whole lot of the new world mentality that we don't see anywhere else in the old world where we see those styles being produced. So, we have a whole lot of freedom. And I think that that's something that's really important is like, I think Sam talked about it earlier, like, sure, people talk about the Finger Lakes and boom, Riesling, great. We make Riesling, we make Cabernet Franc. I think the reality is that we also can make a whole lot of other things. And because we don't have 5,000 years of baggage telling us what we have to grow and can only grow, I think we have the opportunity to really experiment in a way of with other grapes and other techniques and other ways of making wine here that I think are really important. So, and what makes, I think, this place special as a climate is, it's funny because we always talk about cool climate. And I think cool climate can be really misleading, right? And I'm sure a lot of people who've heard me talk about this are rolling their eyes again right now at me. But like, I think when we talk about cool climate, it gives us this idea that we struggle for ripeness. And I think what we've got to talk about is the fact that we are a efficient climate. So a lot of times you'll talk about cool climates and people think, oh, like long, slow ripening process and long hang times and all this stuff. No, that's not what we have. We're a short growing season. We start late and we have a really hard end date, as Brad mentioned earlier. Like all of a sudden, hey, 2 nights ago, I woke up and there was ice on my windshield. I was like, okay, well, that might be us stopping, picking real soon for a lot of things. We have a hard end date. Like we don't have this opportunity to just wait till we want to pick whenever we want. So I think one of the things that's really important to understand is that in between those, our late start and our early end, we have a super efficient ripening cycle that I think a lot of other regions don't necessarily see. We talk about this and you can look at like our growing degree days versus, a place like Walla Walla or Napa or something like that. And we have as many growing degree days in half the time. And the reason is that we never have like these blackout periods when it comes to ripening here. We're never in the hundreds. So we never see our vines go into thermal shutdown. We are never, pretty much never in drought. Like we were in a big drought this year because it only rained 6 times a month or something. Like we don't go into hydric stress and things like that. And our vines don't really typically shut down. This might be one of the extreme years that we've actually seen it happen a little bit. But when you talk about a place like, like Walla Walla or Napa, you might talk about this really long growing season, but the reality is that you'll have 2 months in a row where, because it's over 100 degrees and there's no water, you don't see fruit evolving. So I think that's something that makes this area really unique. And I've been making wine here for 11 years now, and I'm still kind of picking my way through understanding what that impact is. But for me, one of the things that I notice in the fruit that I grow, but also the fruit that I buy, and the fruit that, Element is a negociant. So, I buy fruit from other growers. One of the things that I've noticed is that I feel like I tend to get ripe phenolics faster than I get sugar ripeness. So I end up seeing wines that are phenolically ripe, where we've got ripe fruit characteristics and we've got this softness to them. But when I'm still at, I still may be under 12.5% alcohol. And I think that that's something that I don't know other regions that I've seen that really happen in exactly that way.
Well, I'd love to talk about the 2014. That's a real treat. It's got some age to it. It's a 6-year-old wine. I know you had requested that, people who are going to try this wine needed to decant it up, a good hour or so, or even more. I think you said 4 hours. Did I
24 is even better. This one will be better the next day.
Yeah. Can you talk to us about, what it's like to be a winemaker of Pinot Noir in the Finger Lakes, and talk specifically about this vintage?
Yeah, it sucks. Pinot Noir is a pain. Pinot Noir is horrific to work with. And the Finger Lakes is a really, really challenging place to grow it. And I think for a really long time, that told people we shouldn't be growing it because it's hard. I think reality, though, has to set in when you look at the great wines of the world, all of which come from places that are hard and challenging to grow pretty much. There's places that Pinot Noir grows really easily. Central Valley, friggin' Languedoc. But does anybody really want to drink those wines? So for me, like when we look at especially a grape like Pinot, it thrives by being hard to grow. And it really loves to be at that absolute limit of impossibility, which, you know, I think, again, for a long time, I think kind of discouraged the Finger Lakes wine community from really taking the potential of Pinot Noir seriously, and certainly discouraged kind of the world from taking our potential seriously with it. But I think when we come back and we rethink that and we really kind of reinvent what might be possible with Pinot here, I think that the potential is huge. Because again, like, yeah, it's challenging. It likes to rot here. It likes to rot everywhere that we want to actually drink Pinot Noir from. It struggles to get right before it falls apart, but that's the case everywhere that it's good. So I think as we kind of start to take that out a little bit, I think Pinot Noir makes a lot of sense here. And again, we have to remember, it's hard to grow and it's friggin' expensive. I mean, frankly, viticulture in the Finger Lakes is expensive. One of my big fights is like, we're not a place to make cheap bulk wine. Like, there's easy places to grow wine. This is not it. So I don't, you know, personally see a need to try and make Pinot for $14.99 to compete with, you know, to compete at sort of the bottom rung of the market, when I think our real potential is really digging in and trying to make great wine and competing with the great Pinot Noirs of the world. So for me, I think that that's a really important thing.
Hey, Chris, could you talk about the composition, the blend, and where the grapes are, you know, specifically from that, you know, for the 2014?
Yeah, so the 2014 came from the east side of Seneca Lake, about halfway up from a place that uses Scott Henry trellising. And it is arguably one of my favorite vineyards to work with year in and year out. I've been working with that vineyard. I think I got my first fruit from them in 2010, and consistently they have produced both my favorite examples of Cabernet Franc fruit and my favorite examples of Pinot fruit here. And so the 2014 was, it was a bit of a challenging vintage, but I think in that it actually produced fruit that I really, really liked. It just was hard because it took an immense amount of sorting that vintage. So it was a year that I really, really needed to spend a lot of time on the hand sorting line, which is one of the reasons I think, you know, for me, I'm a big fan of hand harvesting. I won't do anything else here, because I think that taking that time with sorting, with really making sure that what's going into my fermenters is perfection, is really important. And the reason for that is because after it goes in, I pretty much don't do anything. I have no tricks, no secrets to winemaking. I put stuff in, I squish it up, and I wait. So that's pretty much what happened here. 2013, I did a little bit of stem inclusion, and I really liked it. And so in a very American way, I figured if a little is good, then a lot is better, and all has got to be the best. So in 2014, I did 100% stem inclusion, which in hindsight is too much, because it's taken 6 years and the wine is still crispy and angular. But I do really like that stem inclusion component here, and I continue to do it, just not necessarily 100%.
Chris, I have one more question before I go over to Megan, but I have a question from Robert Provence. Why do you have it listed as 11 to 14% on the label? He wants to know the alcohol.
Mostly because I can. Is really it. No, it's because for the longest time I had no idea what the alcohol actually was. I never really did any testing on my wines. So I just figured I was safe with the range between 11 and 14. And also was ultimately really because, again, when I started 10 years ago, I think the consumer perception back then was still like alcohol was still a thing that people were excited about. And I just didn't want to give people the opportunity to prejudge the wine based on a number that's on the label without tasting it. So I think ultimately it was, I didn't really want people to know that the wines were only 11.5% most of the time. And then the other part is I just didn't really know some of the times.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for that breakdown. And that was really great. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it, just like I did. I always learn something new from you. over to Megan. Megan Frank of Dr. Konstantin Frank. She's going to be featuring her Old Vines Pinot Noir, the 2018 vintage. She went off to Australia for a little while to the top wine business school in Adelaide, came back home, took that skill set, and now she's the general manager. They're over at Keuka Lake, so we can talk a little bit about that and how it differs from Seneca Lake. But, you know, just from a historical context, Dr. Konstantin Frank is such an important winery. And I went out there 2 years ago, I feel, had a wonderful lunch out there. It was absolutely gorgeous. We got to see some, you know, you guys were disgorging some sparkling wines out there. That was a lot of fun. You guys are known for your sparkling wines, not just your still wines, but make some fantastic sparkling wines that age unbelievably age-worthy. And talk to us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about the winery, and then we'll go right into the 2018 Pinot Noir.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you, Yannick. And so nice to see so many familiar faces and to be part of this group. It's really a pleasure and an honor. And I loved your talk, Christopher. It's really nice to think about the Finger Lakes in context. And sometimes we forget that, you know, as a region, we're just so insular and looking at just ourselves. So that was really great. Dr. Konstantin Frank Winery, we're on the west side of Keuka Lake, about 6 miles from a tiny little town called Hammondsport. And the winery was started by my great-grandfather, Konstantin Frank. So he was a World War II refugee out of Ukraine. Sorry, it's a little loud. I'm in the sparkling winery. There's some forklifts going downstairs. We have the best internet here, so I had to find a space. Internet's very difficult in this area. So west side of Keuka Lake. So Konstantin arrived at the age of 52. He didn't speak a word of English. He came through New York City and basically had to start over. So he went to the nearest location where they were planting vines and growing grapes, and that was the Geneva Experiment Station at Cornell. So there he learned that, you know, vinifera was not really seen as viable in the Finger Lakes, and he was really perplexed by that because in Ukraine, you know, he was managing a 2,000-acre estate with vinifera. So and it was much colder in Ukraine, and the researchers told him it was too cold in the Finger Lakes. So this was very perplexing to him, and he actually had a theory that it was due to phylloxera, not the cold, and he began grafting with cold-hardy American rootstock. And actually, prior to him starting our winery, he purchased the land in 1957. He actually did a stint at Gold Seal Vineyards, where he was managing the experimental vineyards there. So in 1954, he started working with Charles Fournier of Gold Seal, and that's actually where he first planted Pinot Noir. So he started work with Riesling, with Chardonnay, and also Pinot Noir, and all three were successful and viable, and that really gave him the proof that he needed to start his own winery a few years later. So we've been planting Pinot Noir since 1957. We actually have the second oldest block in America, right on our farm on Keuka Lake, and we have additional plantings over on Seneca Lake in Hector as well. So we work not only with Pinot Noir, but we work with 17 different vinifera varieties, and there's just a lot going on. So, but the Pinot Noir has always been a very special one for us.
How, I mean, we'll follow up with Chris, but how difficult for you guys is it to work with Pinot Noir? Or is it just extremely gratifying once you put in the bottle? I mean, I'm tasting it now, and I gave it a slight chill, and it's absolutely delicious. It's vibrant. It's all this red, crunchy fruit. I like that style.
Sure. Yeah, I would definitely second Christopher's take on Pinot Noir. It is very, very difficult. Very difficult variety in a difficult region. But Pinot, there's been a tremendous growth with plantings with Pinot Noir and a lot of pressure in the market because so many producers are using it for rosé and also for sparkling. So there's so many avenues to go. And we're actually planting an additional 5 acres in Hector next year, just because it's so difficult to source and we're not growing enough of it. So it is a difficult one, but I think it pays off in the long run. And there's a tremendous diversity also with different clones in the region. I know Pinot, there's like 1,000 different clones available, but because there's so many different people working with it, the clonal diversity is quite interesting. So so I would say there's a lot of people working with it, and it's continuing to grow. So tremendous potential there.
Megan, on your blend here, you have 60% of the fruit, Pinot Noir fruit, coming from Seneca, 40% from Cuca. Maybe to give people some kind of idea on why 60-40, and stylistically, how are they different, the Pinot Noir that comes from Cuca Lake as opposed to Seneca?
Sure. Yeah. So on our Cuca estate, we have a very high content of shale in the soil. It is a little bit cooler on the west side of Cuca as well. So, the fruit is ripening a little bit later, typically. We haven't even started harvest on our Cuca estate, whereas on Seneca, we've been, working already with Gruner Veltliner, with some Chardonnay, with already some Pinot Noir, and of course, sparkling as well. So it is very interesting how much further along the Seneca estate is. And we are on the east side of Seneca. So over near where Aaron is, one of the warmest sites, of the Finger Lakes, and over near Hector. So yes.
Would you mind talking a little bit about that? Because I think that's important for some people who are really interested in the Finger Lakes. There's one particular area called the Banana Belt. It's sort of a local nickname that you guys have given that. And can you go a little bit more into detail about that so they fully understand what that means?
Yeah. So we don't grow any bananas, but it is a little bit warmer than it is in other areas. So on the east side, we're getting really nice, really long kind of sun exposure. Seneca's over 600 feet deep, so it's the deepest Finger Lake. So depending on where the vineyards are located, proximity to the lake, there's an incredible moderating effect there. And you're getting the afternoon sun, so very, very important for ripening. And we even see it, my father purchased that property in the early 2000s after 3 record cold winters that he just said we, are just losing, I think they lost 80% of the yield. And that was, I think, 02, 03, and 04 were very, very difficult vintages. And he just said, we need to find, warmer sites in the area. And that has been a tremendous help for us to expand our acreage over in Hector.
Megan, before I go over to Glenn from Damiani, could you talk to us a little bit about 2018 and also talk to us about the old vines? Why did you put old vines on your label and what does that signify?
Sure, yeah. So the old vines really signifies that, planting in 1957, that, has a lot of heritage for us. And while it's not all coming from that block, the majority, with the blocks from the 70s and the 80s, is a really nice contribution there. So 2018, as Gabriella mentioned, was a very challenging year, very difficult. And Pinot Noir, it was tremendously difficult with Pinot Noir. So a lot of sorting in the vineyard was very necessary. Very, very challenging year. This wine was actually just bottled about a month ago. So it does, need a little bit more time. Probably in bottle to kind of relax a little bit. But as you mentioned, Yannick, it has really bright red fruits, kind of that really nice cranberry, pomegranate kind of freshness. And I think that's something, that's very kind of universal with Finger Lakes Pinot. So just a little bit of new oak here, just about 20%, 18 months in barrel, all French oak. And so just needs a little bit more time, but a very, very fresh style of Pinot.
Well, Megan, the wine's delicious. What you guys are doing is great, and keep up the good work. And we'll go over to Glenn Allen of Damiani Wine Cellars, and his winery, I believe, is just south of Hector. Am I wrong, Glenn? Yeah. No, you're. Yeah, there you go. Now you're.
There we go. Yeah, no, we're actually in Hector.
Yeah.
So we're like smack dab in the banana belt. The tasting room where I am is south of our production. Here's my office. You want to see the Seneca Lake view, bocce court. So all work and no play, you know what they say.
Yeah, I was very.
So yeah,
fortunate.
we're I was going to say, one of the interesting things about us is we have not just one estate, but we have 4 different vineyards all along the east side here. And it allows us to play around with the different sites. And I think building on what my colleagues have said, this is a really fun area to grow, even with all the headaches associated with Pinot Noir. It's so expressive of sites that we've been quite intrigued by the different flavors we get out of different sites. Not even to mention the introduction of different clones, so we've been playing with those as well.
Yeah, I had the good fortune of coming by a few years back, and I spent some time with Phil Aris, the winemaker, who's really doing some fantastic stuff. And I know
I know it'll be a moment, so if you don't mind just throwing your masks on, and we'll.
I know you wanted to emphasize and talk a little bit about clones and how they relate to, because one thing about the Finger Lakes, it's really a mosaic of different soil types, and then on top of that, you've got the slope to take into consideration, what aspect of the where the vineyards are at, as opposed to where the sun is setting. So can you talk to a bit about the soils that your vineyards sit on and what kind of clonal selections you've chosen to go with and why?
Sure. So we're on a deep loam soil. It's called a Howard gravelly loam with pockets of clay. That's the Davis Vineyard. I should mention, just to back up, I'm one of 3 owners. So it's Phil Davis and Lou Damiani, who started this winery as friends growing up here in Hector in the 90s. They started planting grapes and making wine. Phil is a 2nd generation grower. So they kept making more and more wine and were selling out of the back of a pickup, decided they should probably get legal, which they did in 2004. I joined them in 2007 when they hired me as a business consultant and showed my expertise in wine drinking. So the 3 of us get along really well. It's a real friendship-based partnership, and we all share passion for wine, particularly Burgundy and Bordeaux. So some of the first grapes they planted were Pinot in both Lou and Phil's vineyard. And since the first planting, which was on a Dijon clone, 115 in Phil's vineyard, then a second block higher up on the hillside, they planted additional Dijon clones to try and get a little more complexity, even though the 115 remains actually our favorite of the 4 clones. So we've got 667, 777, and 114. Each one of those brings a slightly different character to the wine. And in the end, our goal is really just to make the most interesting wine we can. So we actually make each of those separately and then decide on a given year which should be put together, which might need the help of the other. And so some years, like 2019, we actually only made 1 Pinot. So this is a blend of all 4 clones. We didn't feel any one stood by itself. And then there are other years, potentially this year, where we'll probably make 4 different bottlings. The last time we did that was in 2012.
Sorry to interrupt you, Glenn. Can you talk a little bit about the 2019 vintage and why you decided not to do single vineyards as opposed to previous vintages, since we just had the 2018 from Dr. Konstantin Franc?
Yeah, well, 18 was difficult. 19 was actually not too bad, but it was quite cool and still had a fair amount of moisture. For us, the Pinot being a very thin-skinned grape, we were running into disease pressure and decided to go ahead and harvest it a little on the early side. And because of the coolness of that year also, we decided to do something with this wine that we had only first done in 2018. We tried the Saunier method, where we bled off a little bit of the juice to concentrate the resulting skin to juice ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And so this 2019 is only the second time we've ever tried that. It, I think, leads to a thicker and more, frankly, more tannic style of wine. This year, we just pulled the Pinot in, and we're doing 0 Saunier. This is a spectacular year for reds. Quite exciting. Like I said, last time we saw a year like this was probably 2012.
So 2020 is looking to be a highly, successful vintage for you guys in general.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Okay, well, that's
I
good
got to
news.
knock on wood. Knock on wood. Yeah, this has been pretty much a perfect growing season.
And when did you start harvesting your Pinot Noir this year? And does each single vineyard have different dates?
We harvested all last week, starting on Monday, and the last came in on Friday. So, period of 1 week, we got through all the Pinot. We did Pinot for our Brut Champagne 2 weeks ago. We also make Champagne and Chardonnay, like everybody here. And so, yeah, so far we're off to a good start. We also brought in Pinot Grigio. Chardonnay is coming in a little bit last week, a little bit today.
Cool. Could you talk to us about the 2019 Damiani Wine Cellars Pinot Noir a little bit as far as the technical information?
Yeah, sure. So this, like all of our Pinots, only sees French oak. And true to our house style, we tend not to want much new oak. To speak to the region produces, I think, sort of elegant and delicate flavors that we don't want to overpower with too much new oak. So this 19 vintage is in entirely 1 year or older French oak. I think when you taste it, you see just a little bit. By the way, cheers everybody. I know I'm the Jimi Hendrix slot here, so thank you all for coming. This has been a fantastic event. I look forward to doing it again. And I'm going to wet my whistle here.
The last shall be first. The last shall be first.
This was bottled in late July. It's an infant. I feel bad, really, in a way, sending this to you guys, but I was hoping maybe you'd enjoy tasting a wine that is truly an infant. Most times, these wines don't hit the shelves until it's had a little bottle age to settle. You know, I'm reminded, Christopher, of our 14 vintage Pinot was super tannic as well, and it took 3-4 years just to come around. So I think this one, while not exactly like the 14, could take another year or two to really settle down.
Well, Glenn, I actually enjoy the wine. I mean, again, it's silky. It's got this great energy to it. Very beautiful, nice acidity. It's really well balanced. I mean, I see nothing wrong with it. I love it.
Great. Just need a little seared duck, a little mushroom risotto. Go with it.
Yeah. I'm not sure if, you know, anyone wants to chime in or if anyone wants to say anything, but, you know, I really just want to thank everybody for making time. I know that we're a little bit past time, but that's okay. That's fine. I know a lot of these winemakers that are here are super busy. They've got wines fermenting. They might have to still go back out, you know, harvesting. So thank you for making time. I know you probably are all anxious right now and ready to go back out running. But, you know, special thank you to Brad Martz, winemaker from Whitecliff, Glenn Allen, owner of Damiani Wine Cellars, Christopher Bates, owner of Element Winery and FLX Restaurants. Check them out. Gabriella Macari, the director of Macari Vineyards, Aaron Royson, winemaker of Lamoreaux Landing Wine Cellars, and Megan Frank, general manager of Dr. Konstantin Frank. Let's all thank them. A toast to you all. And, you know, also to a great vintage for you all, too.
Thanks, Yannick. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jennifer Cooper. I have been communicating with you all during this process. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. I just wanted to let you know that we'll be sending out the recording of the seminar as well as contact information for all of the wineries. We'll also be including a brief survey that we hope you'll complete to share your feedback on this virtual event. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Sam.
Great. I also want to thank all the wineries that joined today: Brad, Aaron, Gabriella, Christopher, Megan, and Glenn. Yannick, always a pleasure to spend time with you. I'm looking forward to the day when you're able to open Contento and we can celebrate with a glass of wine, being probably some of the last holdouts here in New York City. But yeah, thank you all for making our second virtual tasting a great success. We appreciate your participation. Please stay in touch with us as we have more to come later this fall. And again, just thank you, Yannick, and we'll turn it back over to you for just some final words.
All I can say is if you have a chance, plan it out, drive out to the Finger Lakes, to Long Island and the North Fork, the Hudson Valley. So much is happening. They're all wonderful individuals. They're all family owned and they could not be nicer. Definitely check them out. We need to support local, and we cannot have a restaurant and claim to be sustainable if we're not supporting local producers. More so than ever, you got to back it up. And I'm really proud and honored as someone who's born and raised in New York to be supporting these wonderful individuals. We're making great products, but they're good human beings. So keep up the good job. Let's support them, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, Yannick. Cheers, guys.
Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.